I'm Hilton Supra, the Vice Chairman of Studium Group. And today I'm interviewing Taylor Hersom, the CEO of Eden Data, where we interview people who are changing the world, people who are inspiring us with their achievements and their creativity and acumen with the use of technology. Now, in previous interviews, Dennis Guardo and I have interviewed over 250 amazing people and achieved more than 14 million views on YouTube. Now, this interview series on Citiesabc is in partnership with our platform, openbusinesscouncil.org, a 4IR-based platform utilizing technologies that employ the use of truth and trust through the unique corporate digital identity, using blockchain and the deployment of data analytics, AI, and machine learning. Now, today I would like to introduce you to Taylor Hersom. Welcome, Taylor, to our podcast on cybersecurity.
Hilton, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
I'm really, really excited to hear a little bit more about, where you're from, etc. I mean, you're an accomplished entrepreneur and a cybersecurity expert, and you're a founder and CEO of Eden Data, where you've in the past been interviewing Fortune 500 companies on compliance and security tactics at Deloitte and serving as the Chief Information Security Officer at various firms. So tell me, what inspired you to get involved in technology? Like, where did you go to school and where did you go to university and where do you live?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually did not start in technology. I thought I was going to be a chef, and then I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. And then I took one semester of anatomy and I realized I am not smart enough for this. So I ended up getting convinced during one of my business general classes to switch over to MIS, so Management Information Systems program. And that's really where I got hooked on security. And sorry, you asked where I went to school. Grew up in Austin, Texas, born and raised here. That's where I live now. But during college, I thought I knew everything, or after high school, and tried to get as far away from my parents as possible. So I went to the University of Montana. So that is out in Missoula, Montana. Ended up being an incredible experience. It's beautiful out there. I still miss it, but that's where I went to college. And the MIS program there was one of the bigger programs out of the business school. And that's where I started to get exposure to all things technology and cybersecurity. And then the professors did a great job there of getting recruiters out there from the big four. So KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, EY. And so I was able to interview with Deloitte and sign the contract to sell my soul to go work for them.
So how long did you work for Deloitte?
I was there for almost 5 years. And I started in Portland, Oregon, and then made my way back home to Austin, Texas. And I started actually in the IT audit space. So essentially it was mostly Fortune 100. In my case, I was specializing in healthcare and life sciences companies. And so we would come in and essentially audit the financial systems. And it was my responsibility to report on the IT infrastructure and the associated security controls related to those financial systems. It's as boring as it sounds.
No, it's not boring. I find it very, it actually sounds boring. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, how necessary it is. But at the end of the day, it seems so fantastic that you went to the, Montana, which is, I've never been, but from what I understand, is a very awe-inspiring space because of the amount of space and the geography, etc. And then you sort of narrow down from that spatial component into something deep dive into cybersecurity. I mean, how did you manage that sort of work-life balance in such a beautiful environment?
I feel like I didn't take advantage enough of, I always think back of living in Montana for a number of years, and I didn't do enough hikes and I didn't do enough hunting and fishing and all the things that were in your backyard, and you don't appreciate it till it's gone. Because when I get to Portland, it's polar opposite. Austin, even more so. Texas is very privatized. So most of the land here is not public land and you can't access it. Whereas Montana is just wide open spaces. You can get to a mountain or a river in 10 minutes or less in many cases. And then, of course, University of Montana is just a picturesque college campus, and you got a river running through it, and it's nestled up against a mountain that you can go hiking every morning. And it brings back memories, but it was a good period in my life.
Yeah. But most people in tech tend to try and have this sort of work-life balance where they are very active in terms of sports and things like that. So what did you get involved in terms of sports?
I didn't play in any sports during college, but I did do intramural soccer, but then I spent most of my time outdoors. So going to Glacier National Park, going to Yellowstone, going on snowboarding trips. Pro tip, as a broke college kid paying my way through college, I worked at REI, which is a big outdoor equipment store out here, and you get incredible discounts. So I was able to get free passes and the best gear and still be a broke college kid and spend my paltry paycheck on gear that I didn't need, but it allowed me to be outdoors even more. So that was how I spent most of my time.
Oh, fantastic. And then when you went to work at Deloitte and after the 5 years, what was the motivation that you had to move on from where you were at Deloitte?
Absolutely. So very early on at Deloitte, I was doing IT audit, which is technically not in cybersecurity. It's what the Big Four have been doing for forever. And then I had this early experience to be able to switch over to the cybersecurity sector within Deloitte. And this is right about the time that Target got breached and Home Depot got breached and things started to really take off in the cybersecurity industry. So it was a good timing exercise for me to be able to operate in a cybersecurity role at Deloitte. And then because of that allowed me to get a chief information security officer, a CISO position pretty early on in my career. And as a senior consultant up for manager at the Big Four, I was under 30 and I didn't think that I was going to be able to be a CISO until my mid 30s. So it was a really early opportunity for me. And so I jumped at that opportunity, and I'm really glad I did. It was what set the bar for me to transition to Eden Data.
Mm-hmm. And Eden Data started how? What was the catalyst for that?
Complete accident. So I didn't enjoy my job. I took that CISO position and I just didn't enjoy the work and the structure. And so I quit my job the last week of February 2020. And we all know what happened. First week of March in 2020, the whole world imploded. I had all these interviews lined up and I had all these big dreams. And then that all dried up because the world went on pause. My then fiance, I just gotten engaged. I just bought a house. I just bought a vehicle, like made all these financial decisions. She was ready to strangle me. So I started searching online and found a site called Upwork.com, and you can basically apply as a freelancer for these various job postings that people put up. And I started applying for cybersecurity positions. I started by just trying to get reviews. That platform is heavy on reviews. And so I would just basically do things for a song just to be able to get that review and have people promise me they give me 5-star reviews. And then very quickly, I had put out all these applications for different job postings, and I started seeing that there were a lot of cybersecurity opportunities. People needed help left and right with random cybersecurity tasks. And it seems like all at once, because of those first few reviews, everybody just started accepting my proposals. And before I knew it, I was pretty buried in work. And so from there, I started hiring my own contractors off of Upwork and realized that's not sustainable. And that's when I started Googling how to start an LLC and spun up Eden Data in January of 2021.
Mm-hmm. But you see, this is very interesting because a lot of the clients that you were dealing with, were they wanting to hire you because they had a problem, or were they hiring you because they had a perceived problem? It
was a mixture of both. That's a fantastic question. It was a mixture of both. But what I figured out, I had never historically had exposure to the startup community, but because I was on Upwork at that time, that's inherently a lot of startups posting things. And what I started seeing was a pattern, which is that startups were trying to sell to companies that were much bigger than them. And those companies were defining, these are the security requirements that you have to meet in order for us to do business with you. And so it was all these iterations of help me fill out the security questionnaire or help me get ready for a SOC 2 attestation. And it was usually a situation of, hey, we're trying to make a sale, not, hey, we just got breached and we need help. And then there was a fair amount of people that were just being preemptively cautious and saying, we need someone dedicated to security to start building a program because our customers are going to ask more about it. And we're worried about our cloud environment. And to be completely transparent, I had coming from Deloitte, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and then being a CISO for random SMBs to then going to startup. It was the startup community is a whole different beast, and it's all different tech infrastructure. And so it was a big learning curve for me, but I basically was paid to learn, and that was amazing.
Yes. I mean, the way I look at it and the way I've read around cybersecurity, a lot of people have cybersecurity as sort of like the last thing on the list that they need to do when they build out a business. They sort of have this, what is called if mentality rather than a when mentality. Is this really the niche that you are capitalizing on?
I don't think I could have said it better myself. That's a great way to summarize it. I think that the issue is that cybersecurity is very new. And then also until you have experienced the pain, you typically don't know the pain exists. And so very similar to until you get your first ticket for speeding, you're probably driving a little faster than the speed limit out there anytime you're on the road. And so I think a lot of times people are very reactive and not proactive. Eden Data took a different approach. We said, okay, I'm not going to try to convince the market. Who am I to be able to convince the market you need security when there are billion-dollar cybersecurity companies that can't do it? But how can I convince the market that you actually need security to grow your business? And that's the approach Eden Data has taken. So, and it's a very true statement. At the end of the day, especially in the startup community, in order for you to grow your business and sell to bigger companies and earn trust with your customers, you have to have some kind of security in place, and you have to be able to prove that security to the outside world. It can't just be a scout's honor. We do these things internally. Typically, these customers are now asking for evidence and they're asking you to align with standards and get certain audit reports and all of that. So I think it's getting more and more strict, which is great. We made that prediction a while ago, and it's paid off thus far.
Thank you. In terms of cybersecurity, in terms of resilience, most companies create a culture about keeping their systems and their data safe. But I think you once said that, in terms of managing that resilience, it's a cliche when it comes to cybersecurity, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Can you talk us through a bit about what are the weakest links in terms of phishing, man-in-the-middle attacks, malware, ransomware? Can you help our audience understand what the challenges are in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of potential breaches?
Yes, absolutely. So the timeless analogy of you're protecting a house that has many doors and windows, and the attacker only has to be able to get into one of them. So it doesn't matter how reinforced your front door is or your back door is. If you've got a window open, then that's your new high standard for security. You can only raise the bar for security as your weakest link, as you mentioned. And so I think that unfortunately, a lot of people, if you just read the news today and you see the various data breaches out there, we're still getting the same things wrong. And so it's always pointing back to human error, people just unfortunately doing silly things and clicking on things and downloading things, and that hasn't changed. It's also inappropriate access. So us giving the wrong access to people, us not being able to see who has access to what, not monitoring for those things or ever reviewing access. So that's another big area. And then the last one is just misconfiguration of your cloud environment is what we see. This could be your on-prem environment as well, but essentially you're going and spinning up all these resources in AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, and you're using all these third-party applications, but you're not configuring them to be secure and you're not monitoring them. And so people misconfigure a single database and they expose all their customer data. That's how Capital One breach happens. That's how Home Depot and a variety of these other big name breaches, it all came down to something simple. And then it's unfortunately the demise, or at least the brand demise for those companies.
Would you say that the majority of this weakest link is human error, or the human component?
I would. If you look at probably the most recent notable breach was LastPass, and that was another situation of human error. That was somebody's laptop being compromised when they took it home, and unfortunately, that the human error element back to what we said before, where people are not taking security seriously. They're not thinking it's a true threat until it's happened to them. Those are the same people that are working at jobs and are indirectly in charge of protecting their company just through their actions in a day-to-day function.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in their day-to-day function, they tend to use applications, platforms, whether it be, spreadsheets or, environments created by, the big online providers of workspaces, et cetera, et cetera. I recall the NHS, which is the UK's national health system, they were breached purely because they hadn't updated. I still think some of them were running on Windows 95.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Those stories happen all too often. It really is that most companies don't have insight into all of their IT environment. People are not doing the basics and determining assets and what software they're using and who's controlling the finances on the back end for that software and those subscriptions. Like, unfortunately, that's not going to go away anytime soon, simply because people are not willing to do the basics.
Yeah, I mean, the most basic thing in the interface between us and the digital world is passwords. You talk about being password savvy. How can we be password savvy? How would you recommend that a process that is adopted across an organization?
So I think the basics is using a password manager. I think that unfortunately LastPass set us 3 steps backwards because they lost trust. They made their customers not trust them anymore, and they made folks question the password manager industry as a whole. I think, though, that fundamentally those technologies are leagues ahead of you just using the same password over and over again, or just coming up with random passwords and putting them on your notepad on your computer. I think that being able to have your password manager and being able to log into various functions with a very complex password that you can control in a password manager really does move the needle on security. I think, though, fundamentally, we need to get to the point where we're going passwordless. So today, your iPhone is using your facial ID, and it has the ability to understand if there's anomalous activity. It will ask you for more prompts than just your Face ID. It'll ask for your keypad. You can lock down your SIM card, things like that. But the first function is passwordless. So being able to just use your face to get into something. We have a client that uses palm vein structure for access management. Like that kind of stuff is really, really cool. And I can't wait for us to get to the point where we're using more UV keys and biometrics to be able to access things, simply because it removes another factor here that humans aren't great at, which is passwords in general. Your password manager is only as strong as where you put that password and how you control it when it comes out of your password manager.
I understand. But in terms of that's, sort of the human interface, but what about the direct interface, like through Wi-Fi networks and things like that?
Yes. So I think that there is a great need for SaaS vendors in general to be able to provide better security function in their applications. So you'd be shocked you probably see this yourself, but a lot of companies still don't have single sign-on capabilities with your Google account or your Microsoft account. There's a lot of companies that still don't offer multi-factor authentication or any kind of logging mechanism or alerts, those kinds of things. That's required from the SaaS providers themselves to incorporate those security technologies. I think that in terms of the industry as a whole, I think that it's going to require more effort from the vendors than it is from the individuals, simply because individuals are just not going to really. This is not interesting to people. It's not something that they obsess over like you and I do. And so therefore, I don't think that we are going to solve this problem by relying on individuals.
So basically you have to create processes and procedures which effectively guide people to have to change behavior.
Yeah, you just have to force them. I think in the audit world, we very much try to push for automated controls instead of manual controls, meaning an automated control is done by a computer. It is something that is completely automated, and you can rely on a computer way more than you can rely on a human. A couple examples are, do I Do I rely on John and HR to go and manually do background checks on people? Or do I have a background check provider that integrates with my GRC tool that tells me every single background check we have on file and who we don't have on file? That's manual versus automated. And I very much think that applies to individuals, both in their personal and professional lives. When we can remove the human element and make it easier on people, it is much more likely to be adopted.
Yeah. And in terms of antivirus software, firewalls, etc., there's a complacency naturally in businesses because, oh no, that's the IT department. They make sure that works.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up Wi-Fi. Sorry, I skipped right over things like Wi-Fi, things like your endpoint itself. I think when you're using a corporate device, the onus of securing that corporate device does technically fall on the corporation. And so deploying antivirus and being able to deploy, ensuring that your hard drive is encrypted and that you have to log in to an actual login screen before accessing your computer, all of that can be enforced by organizations. I think a lot of companies don't enforce that centrally. They just rely on their employees to do it. And that's not good because, again, humans. And so I think that in the case of things like securing that endpoint, securing what network they connect to, there's a lot of things the organizations can do, such as deploying antivirus centrally, deploying a mobile device management solution that controls and basically takes over admin rights to that computer, and then also requiring things like a VPN or a secured connection before you're connecting to any corporate assets, basically.
I understand. So could you just, for the sake of our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about what is phishing?
Phishing, yes. I mean, to put it quite simply, it's a form of an attack where a malicious intender is trying to compromise either information that you have or compromise a device that you are on. And they accomplish this in a few different ways. So we're seeing a lot of variations of phishing. Phishing fundamentally is clicking a bad link, downloading a bad file. But we're also starting to see smishing, which is like SMS, text messages being, hey, it's Taylor. I'm in a meeting. I can't talk. I need you to send me gift cards. And it is insane how many people fall for that. Like not
me personally, but from one of my colleagues, that exact thing happened, and it was only because my colleague, who was a new member of the team, messaged me saying, "I've just got this message and I have to do some money to so and so and so and so," and I went, "No, that's not right." And he didn't. Thank God, he didn't move forward with that. But I was like, he nearly fell for it.
Right. Yeah. It is, they play on human emotion. I think we've seen a lot of, I mean, myself, even my grandmother got a call that I was in jail and this person tried to act like me. They had found a video of me online and they tried to sound like me. They said that they broke their nose in a car wreck and that I was in jail and I needed bailout money. Please don't tell my parents, this whole thing. And my grandmother sent $8,000 in cash in a FedEx envelope to a random location. Thankfully, we got the cops involved and we stopped it at the location and someone was arrested. But that kind of stuff, they play on your heartstrings and then people will not think logically at all. And it happens all the time. And that's exactly why cyber attacks don't have to be sophisticated today, because people are still falling for those things.
So you would say that something like this, in terms of standard methodology and practice in a corporate environment, would be just like you would do with compliance in the financial services industry. You would do, from a technical experience, teach people what are the issues to do with cybersecurity and have a whole sort of training program aligned to all the issues that may happen.
Exactly. I think it's very much a multi-pronged approach. So, of course, automating controls whenever possible. I always push for that. But then there is always going to be some human element involved in you operating your business and accessing critical systems. And so because of that, you need to keep your staff up to date on what's going on. And most people are not nerds like us and don't keep up with the latest and greatest attacks. And so they need to be educated in some format. The problem is there's so many security training tools out there that are just pitiful. They're awful. They're not fun. People don't pay attention. It's like we're back in college where we retain less than 10% of the information we hear. So there are some really cool companies that are doing things like virtual escape rooms and more interactive gamified approaches that seem to be working better. I think that at the end of the day, the education is not going to go away. It's a very important element of your security program, just by keeping your staff apprised of the latest and greatest threats.
I mean, in terms of phishing, can you explain what man-in-the-middle attack is like? What is that?
Yes. So a man-in-the-middle attack is essentially that somebody, it can be actually physical, it can be digital, but essentially somebody is catching, usually it's credentials in the middle of a process or a login attempt or something similar, and rerouting that. And so in the case of logging into your LastPass account, I think that if you are sitting at a Starbucks and you're trying to enter your master password on a LastPass, and you say, man, I need to be able to connect to Wi-Fi. Let me get on. And well, that's weird. There's Starbucks 1 and there's Starbucks 2 and Starbucks 5G, and only 2 of those are controlled by Starbucks. The other one is a malicious Wi-Fi network, and it compromises the entire internet traffic. It's essentially capturing that packet with all the information that they would need to take over your LastPass account. That's just one example of many, but.
So you would recommend in anybody using a free Wi-Fi access point would effectively put up a QR code, which basically ensures that people are going direct to an appropriate Wi-Fi network.
Yes, I think that a lot of people freak out about Wi-Fi in general, especially in the cybersecurity community, even if it is controlled by a corporation, because their responsibility is technically to keep that network secure, and they could be compromised just like any other organization can. But the risk of that is far lower than connecting to some random person that's sitting 3 tables over who spun up their own malicious Wi-Fi network. I mean, the problem is catching that is virtually impossible. There's no criminal impact on people that are doing that. It's almost just too easy. You can pick a coffee shop, sit down for a few hours, and compromise credentials to your heart's content.
Jeepers, that's terrifying.
I know, we need to talk about something more positive here.
Exactly. Like, okay, malware, that's malicious software. I mean, that's been picked up in sort of Trojan horses and worms and things, like all these words that are used, but that's really how it's just a good virus or firewall technology to stop those sort of things finding their way onto your system. Exactly.
I think antivirus and anti-malware and EDR, which endpoint detection and response, like these are all big buzzwords in the security community, and they're very important, but they're such an easy technology to implement, and it virtually removes the threat of your computer being compromised by simply deploying one of these technologies. So everyone's pretty much heard of antivirus at this point. Norton's been around forever, McAfee, all of these great tools. But I think that what people don't understand is that even the native OS providers, so Mac and Windows in particular, they are inherently now out of the box providing anti-malware solutions. So like we use CrowdStrike internally, which is a very robust endpoint detection response / anti-malware solution. But we also use solely Macs, and the Mac has this backend. You'll never even see it. You can't search on your computer for antivirus. It's just running in the background. It's called XProtect, and it works phenomenally well. And so just by using modern technology and then employing some kind of deploying some kind of antivirus solution and just Googling antivirus, there's so many great providers out there. That's a very easy thing to implement.
This is very interesting, because I was going to ask you about Mac, because we all are using OS and Mac all the time. And what you've just described, I think, makes it very comforting that it's not well known that is the case.
Exactly. I think that Another thing that people don't think about when we were talking about password managers. The best thing you can use for a password manager tool as an individual is not LastPass and Keeper and Dashlane and all the 1Password. It's actually just using your native OS password manager. So I believe it's Safari's. It's not even Safari. It's Mac native, and now I'm drawing a blank on exactly what they call it. But the password manager on your Mac, all of that is stored at the local OS layer. You can sync it with your iCloud, but it's encrypted the whole way. It'll sync with your phone and your computer. But outside of that, it's not sitting out on a server somewhere necessarily in the same way that a cloud password manager is provided and hosted. So things like that, just leveraging your native OS capabilities goes a long way in securing your assets.
Wow. I mean, in the instance where, a system gets compromised, the end game tends to be, in some respects, and we only hear about the big ones rather than the everyday ones, but ransomware, in terms of scammers coming to basically, ransom you for money, for reversing, for giving access to the system. I mean, in terms of a business, a lot of people have no plan in place based on, an if versus when scenario. What would you recommend in that space?
Or if an individual is compromised, eventually, I think that the first thing that they would have to understand is what, I guess it comes down to what happened, but essentially individuals being ransomed versus corporations is usually, it's similar in some ways, but quite different in many others. I think that one of the things that we're seeing a lot more of is the crypto world being compromised. And so if someone's got a Bitcoin wallet that's been compromised, they're definitely willing to do whatever it takes to get that money back. The problem is that most of the time it's not ransomware. It's usually just, hey, we just compromised your wallet. Have a great day. Because typically with ransomware, they're compromising a database, some kind of intellectual property, something that's very valuable, but is not a currency itself. And then they're asking for a currency in exchange to get access back to it. And so a lot of times when individuals are attacked, it's a financial attack. I think that a lot of people, like when you get your email compromised, your email is essentially the gateway drug to all your different assets, right? Your bank accounts and your social media and all of that is only as strong as technically your email. And so if your email gets compromised, we've seen situations where ransomware they've received a message, transfer Bitcoin here. And unfortunately, there is not a lot you can do in those situations. In some cases, we've seen people successfully work with the email provider to get access back to their account. I think that it really comes down to what was compromised. So things like we've seen, I just talked to someone last week whose laptop was compromised and their camera was overridden, and they had been recorded a series of times with their camera that was in their bedroom. And you can fill in the details on the rest, but unfortunately that information was pretty valuable. And so they had to proceed with working with the demands of the person that had compromised them. And so unfortunately, those things happen far more than we ever hear about. And the issue in the industry as a whole is that when this does happen, you're not shouting from the rooftops. Most people are very embarrassed. Most people don't want to talk about it. So through your core circle of friends that may bring it up nonchalantly, but outside of that, we don't have a database of how many people are compromised. I can certainly count on more than two hands how many people in my life have been compromised in some form or fashion, but unfortunately, there's not a central source of truth on that information.
But in terms of corporates putting a plan in place of, as I said, if rather than when, because most people don't have an if plan at all, do they?
Right.
Corporates.
No, that's a very valid point. So for the most part, the one thing that we're seeing a huge tumultuous shift in is the cyber insurance industry. So cyber insurance has been out for a number of years. but unfortunately they're losing their bums. And that's because people didn't have appropriate security in place. And so they unfortunately had to pay out those policies, and the cyber insurance carriers are providing that money. A lot of cyber insurance carriers have gone out of business now. And then more of them are saying, okay, I'm either going to raise the bar really high on how I validate what your security is, or I'm just not going to provide cyber insurance anymore. And that's what's happening right now. So people are suddenly shifting from, oh, I can just rely on my cyber insurance carrier to help me in the events of ransomware, because theoretically they're supposed to provide you resources. They're supposed to provide you the currency to pay the ransom, all of these things. That's not happening anymore, not in 2023. And even when you do have a plan in place and you've provided all your security, there are a lot of clauses in those contracts that are very, very specific on how you can be compromised, when they'll pay out, when they won't. And when I say they, I mean the insurance carriers. So kind of terrifying. So first step is don't rely on cyber insurance as your sole strategy. I think that one of the biggest things that you can do is focusing on some of the very, very fundamentals, making sure that access is dialed in, making sure that multi-factor is in place, and then having a plan in place for what the heck you're going to do if your database is just encrypted and compromised tomorrow. And a lot of companies don't sit down and say, where does my data live? What systems could I lose and what systems couldn't I lose? What does my business rely on? And having that information in a written format is critically important, because otherwise when you're panicking and you're acting emotionally, and you're not going to be able to have any kind of game plan, and you're going to run around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned something to do with the growth with technology today, where we're going from, our digital identity is essentially, as you said in the beginning, our password and our email. And then and now we're moving into having wallets, and these wallets can hold not only my identity, I can sign things with them, I can hold tokens, I can hold Bitcoin, I can hold all these things. And these things become very valuable. So what layers of protection? I mean, you can lose your whole identity effectively by losing your wallet.
You are so correct. I think to add another element to that too, society has been built on an age-old database of information, meaning that here in the US, we have things like driver's licenses and social security numbers, dates of birth. Those things don't change. You can't just change your date of birth. You can't change your social security number. And so unfortunately, you can only compromise those once, and then you're indefinitely having to worry about them. And that is a real problem across society, because we don't have a very sustainable way to combat this. It's taking a ton of time, effort, energy. We've got countless, there's another element that always scares me, and I keep going down the scared route, and I don't mean to, but children are getting their identities compromised ever before they're becoming adults. And there's been horror stories of people turning 18 and trying to take out a loan for their first house or for their car or whatever, and they can't because their credit's at zero essentially. And it's because somebody's had a credit card on them for years. And it's just terrible things like that unfortunately we are going to have to come together as a society and really figure out, how do we combat this? But the best thing we can do as individuals is protect those at all costs.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's down to education. I mean, if you look at the young people growing up today, they are playing on Roblox. They are sharing so much information with each other through social media.
Yes.
Nefarious actors could easily compromise a younger person purely because, be my friend.
They're moldable. Right. And now we're talking at a time when TikTok is being banned in the entire country of the US, and it's already been banned in other countries. I believe Europe and UK are also, this is on the table for them. And the reason is not because of the individuals and the data that they're providing. It is actually because it is now a nation threat of being able to compromise the mindset of an entire population. And you have all these moldable young adults that are going to go into society and make decisions, and you can start to feed them just the right amount of social media videos and things to sway them one political view or the other, and start to make them more extreme in their viewpoints in certain regards. And you can mold an entire society. And that's terrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, it moves on to a very current point, which is the use of artificial intelligence and the way that has suddenly overtaken, the conversation because of nefarious threats that can come with how artificial intelligence could actually, say, sway a nation or sway an issue or easily compromise individuals' integrity.
Yes. Artificial intelligence is going to add a lot of value, and it's also going to create a lot of hindrance, unfortunately. And there's no controlling that. I think I know that there's a lot of leaders that are trying to shut down artificial intelligence, and you can't stop that snowball once it's started, right? I think the best thing we can do is put barriers around how it's used. But unfortunately, one of the big things that's going to happen is that every problem that we've experienced, from phishing emails to everything we've talked about on this call, on this podcast, it's very much exacerbated by AI. It can be done at a much larger scale with AI. So the algorithms and the data that is being used nefariously and the phishing attempts and the various ransomware attacks, all of that can be streamlined and further automated with AI.
So from your perspective at Eden Data, you already thinking in ways in which you can consult with your clients and help build in that resilience to the use of AI as a threat in the systems that you're looking after.
That's exactly correct. So we are internally figuring out in our R&D department, how are we going to leverage this to be able to provide more robust security tools to our customers? How are they going to leverage it internally? We've had discussions around how can they leverage AI and adopt new tools that are leveraging AI to be able to better protect their environment. And then we've got customers that are adopting AI in their own SaaS platforms. And how do we stay mindful of that? And how do we address the associated risks with it? Just like with any other technology. I think that, unfortunately, I don't think anybody on the planet is really doing risk assessments on AI functions. And that is going to have to change. I think back to, we were talking about regulation, and regulation is totally a necessary evil because people just it's the Wild West otherwise. So we're going to have some kind of enforcement for fundamental security around AI and put up some barriers and roadblocks here.
I mean, there's some very positive things about AI, as you mentioned before. You can have your own AI identity, which basically tracks your behavior and knows the way that you talk, the way that you write, the way that you do things. But then if anybody tries to mirror you, it can say, oh, wait, that's not you, it's somebody else.
Yes, I think that the technology, to be clear, I'm pro AI. I think it can be used in so many amazing ways. And I think that it can save a lot of time in the cybersecurity industry. I think that right now, things like aggregating logs and sifting through logs and identifying manually when someone is logging in from an anomalous location, all of those things take human effort, and we don't care about them, and they're boring even for cybersecurity professionals. Nobody wants to do that. And so can we give people back time and increase our risk posture, or our security posture? That's very, very intriguing to me.
Yeah. And see that your R&D department is going to be very busy.
Yes, I think everyone's racing to see how is this going to change the world, and I think every single company is going to need some form of a strategy around AI in general, simply because we are either going to use it ourselves, or we're going to have to deal with it through the vendors we work with, or through the risks that are impacting our organization and how nefarious intenders are using it.
Absolutely. On a personal note, in terms of your forecast of where AI is going and what AI will be like in 5 years' time, can you give us some sort of ideas of what we can expect?
Oh, I think it's purely, there's much smarter people in the world than myself. I can speculate, but it's purely speculation. I certainly think that there's going to be a lot of a shift in certain industries. I think marketing is one of the biggest ones. We're already seeing that. That was the first one disrupted. You're going to have all sorts of opportunities and issues. So opportunity side, my team's using AI to generate new ideas on how we can put out content and what our marketing materials look like. And that's really cool. But then there's also the side of artists that spend hours and hours creating truly brilliant things that can be created in seconds by AI. And those people are no longer going to get credit that they deserve. Yeah. And then there is going to be copywriting issues. There already is. There's going to be also a big hit on, I think, the SEO market as a whole. Mm-hmm. So when it's suddenly you're competing for backlinks and keywords and all of these things that are fairly simple to create, it's going to completely disrupt how we are ranked and how we are achieving our rankings on Google and such, and then how our paid ads operate and all of these things. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but we're going to have to completely shift how those things are gauged and how we pay for those services and all sorts of other things. And then the security industry, I think just automation of a lot of tasks, but I think that's going to happen in pretty much every industry. So we're seeing it in legal as well. But I think that I do see a positive benefit in that humans are going to be able to continue to spend more time on creative elements that a AI algorithm can't produce. And then we're going to be able to pass off a lot of our menial tasks to AI functions. And so I think that the last thing I'll close with is that time is a very precious commodity for all of us, arguably the most precious commodity. And so I think that AI is going to give us back a lot of time. I think that unfortunately, some people are going to be very disrupted by AI, and they need to be thinking now what their next plan is going to be and not figure that out after the fact. Very much the proactive versus reactive that we started the conversation with.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not that AI is going to take somebody's job. Their jobs can be taken by somebody who is using AI.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody's still got to drive it. I do think we'll get to a point where it no longer has to be driven. And that's kind of a terrifying thought. But for the most part, there's going to be plenty of new jobs created. I think that as a marketer, I've talked to a handful of entrepreneurs that are in the marketing space, and they're very much like fear, uncertainty, doubt, thinking that this is the end of the world. And they need to really just be shifting how they can automate now 90% of their function that they do, lower their costs, serve more customers. Like there's a tremendous opportunity for you to scale and to be able to do all these cool things with AI. People are going to need to know how to create the prompts and how to use the tools and how to take an image out of Midjourney and turn it into an actual deliverable. Those things still don't exist today, and they need people that can do that.
I mean, from the potential disruptive element in terms of people's jobs, job security and things like that, one thing I think a lot of people are missing is that the use and adoption of tools, particularly in the AI, will accelerate the ability for companies to achieve their goals and their targets, which would increase revenues and therefore would drive the economy forward. Do you think that's going to have a major impact in the growth of companies?
I do. I think that certain companies are going to be able to have a market advantage and take advantage of the early adoption phase that we're in. I think very similar to NFTs and crypto, there have been so many people that lost their bums doing, trading in either of those commodities. But for the most part, there was a lot of people that made a lot of money right at the beginning simply by being early to the table. So that's going to happen with AI. I do think that there's going to be a wider and wider gap between small business and enterprise. I think enterprise have an unfair advantage, and so they're going to continue to dominate simply because they're first to the table and have the most money to spend. But the beauty is companies like OpenAI have really opened up the world to being able to experience AI for a very nominal cost, in some cases free. So I think that there's not really an excuse if you're a one-person entrepreneur versus a mid to enterprise sized business. You should be playing with AI in some form or fashion.
Already, exactly. And one of the interesting developments that we've seen recently is avatars, where at the moment the avatar is effectively controlled by the user. But of course, with the advent of AI, you could send your own identity as your own and in the form of an avatar driven by AI, and you can set it out in the world. What have you thought about framing a cybersecurity environment around that?
So with avatars specifically, yes, there's this rise of, I see avatars in a few different ways. There's of course digital identities. You've got on Twitter, you've got the folks that are saying the insert some kind of name guy or gal. And so there's I follow the car dealership guy, and it's pretty cool to see that these people have built up completely digital identities and amassed a great deal of followers. So you've got that side. You've got people that can do better iterations of their existing profiles and make themselves look more presentable. I've seen headshot generators. This is mind boggling as someone that worked at Deloitte and had to go do the traditional headshot, right? You can now upload just about any photo from your camera, from your smartphone, and they will turn it into a professional headshot, or you can call in from Mars or whatever the case may be. So there's that aspect. And then you've got deepfake technology, which is a little scarier. So deepfake is going to be used for good and evil. I think that there's going to be people that can build up entire identities. There's countless Instagram accounts now that are purely AI deepfake, or they're not even deepfake. Deepfake is implying that they are not the person they are trying to portray, whereas they're completely AI generated identities on Instagram, and they're well known that they are AI generated, and they're still very popular, millions of followers. So deepfake technology specifically, I think, is going to be very interesting because it's going to be used for politics. It's going to be used for reputational attacks and misinformation and all sorts of nefarious things. But I think that it'll also be used for people creating entire new businesses around these digital identities. And I think that that's kind of it's a new avenue for creatives to play with.
But in a way, as a cybersecurity expert, you want to be able to look at ways in which you can detect if it's a real person or a generated AI in such a way that you can, because in the future, we're going to be using facial recognition and things like that, as you mentioned before, to your two-factor authentication. So we have to be sort of conscious that we have to rise to the challenge going forward.
It really is just changing that identifier that we're talking about different forms of authentication. Today we use passwords and a text message or an authenticator app or something similar. I think that tomorrow we'll have to really dive into the technology of how is this person, I don't know if it's a deep fake on Zoom, like how is that packet coming across? It's different than you and I talking on Zoom right now. Like there's going to have to be a different identifier set in order to validate the identity of someone. And that's not necessarily it's a solvable problem. It's not an easy problem to solve, but it is a very solvable problem. I think we'll just have to be better about identifying the true identity of the person that we're talking to or that we're interacting with.
Wow. I mean, the challenges are on the table, and you have significant challenges going forward as a cybersecurity expert at Eden and Eden Data. I'm fascinated by what you've been saying and talking about today, because it's been an area that a lot of people don't even talk about. They think it's just going to be delegate that to some third party and everything will be okay. But I think we've raised some very important issues today. And I thank you very much for all that wonderful information and explanation. And you explained it so well. Thank you very much indeed for the work that you're doing. And I think it's really necessary. Now, if anybody wants to get hold of you, can you please tell us how do they get hold of you?
Thank you for the kind words, Hilton. Yeah. This was the most fun I've had in a while on a podcast. This was good to nerd out, and I hope I didn't scare everybody. I think we planted the seed to open the floor for more discussion, right? And so to find me, I'm on LinkedIn under Taylor Hersom, and I'm on Twitter under Taylor Hersom. Would love for people to connect. I'm always here to nerd out on security and compliance and data privacy. So please reach out to me. And then our website is edendata.com, EDEN data.com. And we're always posting new content and blog posts and podcasts and all that fun stuff.
Brilliant. Taylor, thank you very much indeed for a really, really entertaining hour. I'm looking forward to putting that out into our channel. And I thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Hilton. Thank you for the platform. And thank you to the listeners for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast.
Thank you. If you're interested in knowing more about citiesabc.com with openbusinesscouncil.org and fashionabc.org, go to our platforms, as well as you can also find me on social media and direct message me, Hilton Super, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And do go to the other interviews we have done on YouTube. And don't forget to like and comment. Thank you very much for your time and engaging with this interview on Citiesabc.